So chapter 1 is the introductory chapter to biology. It will give you an overview of everything we'll be covering this semester. We'll cover the major concepts that we'll repeatedly see throughout the semester. So what are the main student learning outcomes for this chapter? We'll talk about the shared nature of science. Science means knowledge, and it's always expanding. You know, all the researchers are always trying to build in the body of science. It's knowledge. How did that knowledge come about? It was by using the scientific method. We'll follow and study the different parts of the scientific method. We'll talk about inductive and deductive reasoning. We'll also talk about properties of life and how life is classified, the hierarchy of life. So all of that we'll be covering very soon. Hierarchy is the different levels of the complexity of life. So why study biology? Bio means living. Life means living. Biology means study of living things. So that's the root words. It's the scientific study of life. See, biology touches every aspect of life. Your food, we have abundant food, is because of the advances in agriculture, right? One of the reasons USA is a very rich country is because of agriculture. We have hybrid varieties that can grow in different types of environments. So our food is coming from there. It gives us a deep understanding of organisms. And because of that, we can devise good drugs. See, if you want to be a car mechanic, right? You have to know how the car works when it's in tip-top shape. Only then you can fix it when it's broken. So in biology, you'll study the, like for example, human anatomy and physiology. You have to study the entire body so that you'll know how to fix it when the patient is sick. An improved understanding of ecology. Now, climate action is like a word that everybody uses. You know, politicians use it, and there's this urgency to address climate change. The solutions lie in biology and innovation that will come with biology. Improved quality of life, improved food, drugs, habitat, clothing, even our clothes. There's a lot of biological principles in the detergent that they use. So when we say science, it includes a lot of fields, right? There's physics, there's chemistry, there's like life sciences like botany, zoology. There's so many branches of science. You know, here there's physics, chemistry, math, they're all science. Science means knowledge. So if you go to the library, we see like, you know, racks and racks of books. How did the knowledge in the books come about? It's by using the scientific method. That is why it is very, very important as science majors, science students in this class, you have to know the scientific method. So it is a logical problem-solving method, a method of research which has like defined steps. You'll have an observation, you make an observation, and then the next step would be to create a hypothesis. So there are these different steps that we will see very soon. So the person who gets credit for first documenting scientific method is St. Francis Bacon. So your first, I think you're also going to be studying this in your lab. Why should we study the scientific method? Because it's the only method that is known to mankind that will take you as close as possible to the truth. And truth is super important, isn't it? So all the more reason we have to follow the scientific method in order to come to the correct answer. There is no prejudice or personal bias. Numbers don't lie. It is universally accepted. If you do an experiment, you follow the scientific method, repeat it several times, and you get the same results, then you can publish it, and the whole world will accept it. And it is repeatable. See, let's say an experiment was done in Japan. If you follow the same protocol, you can repeat it in USA. Never forget this, note it down. So this is the reason we are studying the scientific method. Universally accepted, it's repeatable, and it's the closest possible to the truth, because numbers don't lie. So let's look at the steps of the scientific method. So as I told you, it has a series of well-defined steps that will include making an observation. That observation leads to a question. You would do some background research and formulate a hypothesis. So a hypothesis is a tentative answer to the question. So the nature of hypothesis is that it should be testable. You can either prove it to be true or false. A very popular definition for hypothesis, it's an educated guess. And then you would test the hypothesis by doing an experiment. And of course, the experiment has a lot of parts. There'll be a procedure for doing the experiment. There'll be all these different variables. There'll be the dependent variable, independent variable. An experiment is not valid without a control. There's repetitions in an experiment, sample size. So there are many factors that go in the experiment. A good experiment will only test one variable at a time. We are going to do an activity after class in order to study this in detail. The variable that the scientist is testing is called dependent variable. And the other variable, the outcome, is called independent variable. The control is like an internal standard, something to compare it with. And then from the experiment, you'll collect a series of data. You analyze it using a lot of statistics. You can represent it in a graph. The x-axis and the y-axis of a graph. The x-axis will have the independent variable, and the dependent variable is the y-axis. And you can plot your data in a graph. And then you communicate your results. Let's say you keep getting the same outcome in the experiment, then you can publish it, send it to the editor. Many scientists will review it. That's why it's called peer-reviewed. And that's why the peer-reviewed scientific journal, a paper, is the most reliable source of information in the world. So this is if your hypothesis is true, right? So let's say you don't see what you saw it. So you falsify the hypothesis. So what you do is you go back, change the hypothesis, and redo it again. And they'll keep on doing it. That's the process of science. It's very time-consuming. There's like two types of reasoning that your book mentions. Inductive reasoning proceeds from a set of specific. It's going from specific to general. Like specific to general. Whereas the opposite, deductive reasoning, is going from general to specific. I would always remember this, like in CSI shows, the forensic scientist will come to the crime scene, right? And then he has all these general assumptions. It could be suspect A or B or C. He's collecting all the evidence, and then he comes to the one specific, right? 100% DNA match. So that is, he's like playing a detective. It's deductive reasoning. So there are two types of science also. They can be basic science, that talks about basic things that are happening. Whereas if you use science to solve a problem, like technology, it is called applied science. So we'll move on to the properties of life. That's the next part in chapter 1. What does it mean to be alive? There's just think about yourself. You are alive. So one of the first things that will define life is that there's this high degree of order in life. Like our body is made up of trillions of cells. There's high degree of order. These cells will come together to form tissues. Each one of them has a job. All of them are maintaining homeostasis. Each one of them are going to process energy in every cell. So those are the properties of life. Just think about you. You were one cell at one time in one point of time, and then you grew and you developed. Living things will always reproduce. If you look at trees, you see the flowers, the seeds will fly in the air. They're always reproducing. So those are the nature of life. So order, high degree of order, cellular organization. They all reproduce. All of them can't need energy. Mostly it's energy in the form of ATP, adenosine triphosphate. No ATP, no life. That's why you and I eat. The food that we eat will be broken down to form ATP, which is the energy currency in our cell. That's metabolism. All life forms will maintain a steady state. It's called homeostasis. For example, our body temperature has to be just right. The pH of your blood has to be just right. If your temperature goes beyond a certain point, you will die. So homeostasis, vital for life. Heredity. We pass on traits to the next generation. And again, it follows certain rules. It's very interesting to study heredity. Living things are very responsive to the environment, and they depend on each other. So in your textbook, there's this mimosa pulpedica plant, that plant. It's called touch me not. You touch it and then it will close up, and then it will open up after some time. So it's responding to the environment. So all living things are constantly responding to the environment to stay alive. And we are very interdependent on each other, and all living things will grow and develop. So why is this very important? Even though it seems trivial, it is not trivial, because there are certain entities that escape this definition of life. Remember, we were talking about, is a virus alive last class? The virus, like a COVID virus that's creating the pandemic and all the deaths in the world, doesn't follow in this category. It doesn't have cells. It reproduces, but taking over the machinery. But it's lacking many of the factors that are mentioned in the definition of life. So that's why they say virus is not living, because it doesn't fit into this definition. The next one we should understand is the hierarchy of life. How is life organized? From the smallest, right? All matter that you see is made up of atoms. So that is the smallest unit. Of course, you can break it out into subatomic particles. So atoms, like there's oxygen, nitrogen in the periodic table, they come together to form the elements of the periodic table. Atoms will come together to form molecules like DNA, RNA, carbohydrates, lipids. Molecules will come together to form organelles like mitochondria, chloroplast, nucleus that can be found in a cell, right? Then the organelles will form cells. Similar cells will form tissues. And like this is like epithelial tissue or skin. A bunch of tissues will come together to form the organ. Like if you take the heart, it is like made up of 4 tissues. It's called epithelium. There'll be a little bit of muscle, there'll be a little bit of connective tissue and neural tissue and all that. All the organ systems put together will form the organism, that is you and me. There's 11 organ systems in our body, and all of them will function together as one, as a team, to maintain homeostasis, to keep you and me alive. And then after organism, similar organism is called as a population. So HCC is a population, Homo sapiens. It's a population. All the populations in one area is called as a community. Like New England is a community. We have deer, there's bears, there's us, there's raccoons. So we are a community. Put all the communities together, you form an ecosystem. Like we are a temperate deciduous ecosystem. There's New England, there's New York, it's huge. Put all the ecosystems of the world together, you have the biosphere. So, see, from the atom, you go to the molecule. Molecules go into organelles, right? So with every step, it becomes more and more complicated. So with every step, there are new properties that come about, and that's called emergent properties. A property is emerging with complexity. So there are scientists who will study cells. They're called cell biologists or cytology. A person who studies tissues will be called as a histologist. There are system biologists is there. A person who studies the environment is an ecologist. So at different levels, we have like different specialities of biologists studying different things. Another powerful aspect you'll have to know is all life is made up of cells. It is called cell theory. Again, it has a very rich history. It all like accelerated after the discovery of the microscope. Plants are made up of cells. We are made up of cells. So what does the cell theory say? All life is made up of cell. It is the fundamental unit of life. And cells arise from pre-existing cell. There's energy flowing in the cell. There's metabolism happening in the cell. There's inheritance in the cell. So here, the 3 points are written very clearly. All living things are made up of cells. So in the microscope, if you zoom into a plant, you can see all the cells. It is the smallest unit of life. One cell can only come from the division of a pre-existing cell. So these are the 3 facets you have to know when you define cell theory. All right, so how is life classified? Again, that also has a very rich history. There's so many different classifications from early 18th century, different scientists saying different things. But this is the most widely accepted phylogenetic tree of life, where you study relatedness of organism by the gene sequence. So it was only recently they started sequencing the DNA of the living organism in order to classify it, especially ribosomal DNA, DNA, because this is the piece of DNA that is very susceptible to mutations. So a phylogenetic tree can be used to show the evolutionary relationship between organisms. And The scientist Carl Woese is instrumental in putting this tree. So if you take all of life, it is believed life evolved from a common ancestor, a prokaryote, a microbe. So it was a common ancestor. How did life begin? The first to evolve is prokaryotes, like bacteria. Prokaryote, first branch. Second is something called archaea. It is a prokaryote too. Then it is eukaryote. So these are called the three domains of life. Bacteria, and archaea are prokaryotes, and eukaryote. So this classification is based on sequencing the ribosomal RNA. So we have three domains, and we have 6 kingdoms. So how life is classified. So here's the three domains: domain bacteria, domain archaea, domain eukaryote. Domain eukaryote has 4 kingdoms in it: plants, animals, fungus, and then it's something called protist. Very, very interesting. Algae is a protist, and algae is responsible for maintaining the oxygen content in the atmosphere. Vital for life. So this is how life is classified. So how do you name organisms? There's like millions and millions of organisms, billions of bacteria and viruses in the world. How are you going to name it? So again, for perfect communication, it was decided, the scientist's name is called Carl Linnaeus. And then he came up with a system of naming organisms called binomial nomenclature. So from, there is domains and kingdoms, and then there's many other classification between that, order, phylum, and all that. And then it comes to the genus name and the species name. For example, this picture is showing human evolution. So this is the fossil record for humans. So you can see there was a hominin ancestor. Chimpanzees took a different route. And then humans diverged 5 million years ago. Our current Homo sapien is only like 30, 40,000 years ago. And then like we have something called Australopithecus. Australopithecus afraiensis is Lucy. And then like she branched, and then that's where you see Homo erectus, Homo sapiens. Homo erectus leaves Africa, so that's where you get the name out of Africa. Homo habilis is the tool man. He discovered tools. And then there's Neanderthals and there's Homo sapiens. So you can see the naming an organism by 2 names: Homo sapien. Homo is the genus name, sapien is the species name. So it's very easy for crossbreeding between the same species. Interesting, isn't it? All right, one powerful concept in biology, it's like a common thread in biology, is evolution. You would have, the father of evolution is Charles Darwin. He first documented it and published it, but that idea was around much earlier than he documented it. So he wrote a book on the origin of species by natural selection. So what is evolution? Evolution is nothing but heritable change. So it's survival of the fittest. You have to adapt to the environment or you will die. Evolution is change in heritable traits of biological populations over a period of time. Kindly look up some videos about evolution and Charles Darwin's work. Very interesting story. He goes to Galapagos and he observes all these different species of life. And he, especially like there's one story where he finds a bird. So it's a bunch of islands. So depending on the environment of the different islands, the beak of the bird will change. If the bird was going to crack a nut, its beak was short and stubby. It's the same bird. They all came from the mainland, probably Ecuador. But like when they came to Galapagos, they all changed. The bird that was like sucking nectar from the plants started to get like a longer beak. So that is evolution. Think about, are you evolving now? Yes? I hope that was helpful.